Welcome to today's Power of Knowing webinar, Life Transitions, Supporting Adults and Children During Times of Change. Understanding comes from knowing. Life brings changes and challenges that can feel overwhelming, whether it's adjusting to family changes, the stress of caregiving, the effects of trauma, or the loss of a loved one. This webinar will explore support options, including counseling, that can provide a safe and supportive space for adults and children to process feelings, discover hope, and move forward with a renewed sense of possibility. The Power of Knowing is a free webinar series created by AuthoriCare Collective, a nonprofit organization that empowers people to be active participants in their care journey, enabling them to live on their own terms through personalized support for mind, body, and spirit. To get us started, please welcome our moderator, Risa Hanow. Risa serves as clinical and community educator at AuthoriCare Collective and is also a member of the Cone Health Ethics Committee. She is a licensed clinical social worker. Risa, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Paul. It is my pleasure to welcome our panelist for today, Dr. Caitlin Walmsley. Here at AuthoriCare Collective, Caitlin is the Director of Behavioral Health and Care Coordination. In our behavioral health area, we provide services for adults, and through our Kids Path program, services for children and teens. Caitlin has experience in creating and directing an integrated behavioral health program that provided same-day access in a primary care setting. Caitlin also has extensive experience as a behavioral therapist with a focus on dealing with those who are at times of crisis, perhaps dealing with suicidal or homicidal thoughts or plans, having concern about self-care, and might be dealing with persistent mental health concerns. Welcome, Caitlin.
Thanks.
We also want to know a bit about who is joining us today for our conversation. So we have two polling questions. They are anonymous, so please feel free to participate. The first one is, who's joining us? All of the different roles that we might feel and fill, go ahead and check all of those that apply to you. And then for the second one, are you or a child in your life currently experiencing a challenge or a life transition? Just to get a sense of what we all have going on in our lives right now for our conversation. So if you could take a moment and go ahead and respond, we appreciate that. We know that people, when we think about our different roles, maybe that adds to some of the stress that we experience in our lives, especially when we have challenges and transitions going on. So if we go ahead and look at those results, we have a good distribution of people who identify as patients, a number of family members and advocates, many healthcare professionals and human service professionals, and well over 50, so 65% of people identify as currently having a challenge or life transition themselves and or a child. So thank you for participating in that. And I want to encourage everyone to make use of the Q&A box. You can submit a question anytime during our conversation, and we'll try to answer that while we're together and having our conversation. So I think, Caitlin, to get us started, the title of our webinar is Life Transitions. So talk about life transitions. What are they? How do they impact us? Maybe how a life transition could be different for an adult than for a child.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we think of life transitions, a lot of times we think of those big ones, which of course count, So some of those things might be grief or loss when someone we care for or love dies. A lot of times we hear a lot about moving or changing jobs, divorce. A lot of the things that happen to us, we can think of as a life transition when they're big, and people in our lives often notice them. Some of the smaller ones we don't always pay as close attention to, such as caregiving or a major change in your responsibilities. So, for example, if your husband gets diagnosed with cancer and now has to go to treatments multiple times a week or can't work, that's a major life transition that we often don't see or think about as other people in their lives until there's another change like a death. Chronic illness is a major change, like changing and not being able to work, or how often you have to go to the doctor, a job loss, even having children that are changing in age. So, a child, for example, moving into adolescence, or a high schooler moving out of the home, that's a major life transition. And something that I think we don't talk about a lot is major changes due to aging. I'm a fairly active person. I think if I wasn't able to leave my home anymore, that would be a major life transition for us. But we often see it as, oh, well, this is normal aging. It might be a very normal thing that happens to us, but it's still a major life transition. And I think positive transitions, like for example, maybe you're moving from an apartment or a rental to a home that you've been saving for, can be a stressor and a major life transition that happens in your life that can create stress or emotional, physical kind of feelings. Life transitions themselves, where if I was going to basic, like what's a life transition, they disrupt your routine. They have different changes in support systems or job roles or even life roles. And they increase that vulnerability to like anxiety, depression, or even that snappiness to a response to somebody. And the impact of them is pretty significant. Some of them, I think we as people tend to be pretty kind and generous about, like grief or loss. And others, like a child moving out of the house to go to college, we're a little less sensitive to because we can see that as a major positive, like, oh my gosh, your kid got into this great school. It's wonderful. But for most people, that's a major transition, especially if it's their last child leaving the home. And adults and kids are quite different in how they experience life transition. And as adults, I think we struggle with children and life transitions because for us, when something might be positive for us, a child may see it differently. And adults process things cognitively. So we might worry or plan or overthink. So if I'm getting ready to move, I'm making a list and a plan of the things that need to be moved, what needs to happen. A child is starting to think, what's going to happen to me when I don't have these friends next door? And they're going to have behaviors. So adults process cognitively, children process behaviorally. So when a kid is struggling with a transition, we're going to see things like regression, irritability, sleep disruptions, maybe problems at school, interpersonal issues. Those would all be signs in a child, all the way kind of up through middle school, that they're having trouble adjusting to a life transition.
I'm thinking about, in the same home or you mentioned the diagnosis. So there's a diagnosis and maybe we don't consider how the child is impacted when the grandparent is diagnosed with cancer or with dementia, but no longer is grandfather showing up to the soccer game or showing
Right.
up to the school activity. And, I don't know if we always think about how things might ripple down to the child.
Right.
As you said, as adults, we think in that processing way, and there's the transition of the illness and needing treatment and the changes that might occur, but thinking about everybody who's impacted and impacted differently.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where we as adults have somewhat more power over things and we can cognitively process. We see that start of that process with dementia most of the time. So we've started to make a plan for it. We know grandpa might not be going to our son's baseball game soon, but a child doesn't always see that same progression and have that same plan. And just because we made a plan for the child and we think it's a good plan, which it very well might be, it might be a wonderful plan. Behaviorally, they may not understand the difference. And so explaining something to a kid cognitively doesn't always work, which is very frustrating for us as adults because we want to just be able to say, well, we're moving to this new house and you're going to have your own room and it's lovely. But the kid's like, but what about my best friend next door? There's not that cognitive understanding of this is actually better for us as a family because they have those behavioral and emotional disconnect.
Well, and isn't it the case? I mean, some of it is age dependent and also individual, but children just by nature are more self-focused. Like, how is this
Yes.
going to affect me, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there's fears and they're not always good at expressing or naming feelings, which is why I guess you're saying we see behavioral, but we might
Right.
not always link what's going on at school as being
Right.
caused by what's going on at home.
Right. Yeah. Children need honest, developmentally appropriate communication. So, a baby, for example, you might not explain that you're moving because that's not developmentally appropriate. A baby to a toddler. They might understand we've got a new room, that kind of thing. But an elementary school child, for sure, is going to understand I'm in a different school district, possibly. So, those are major life transitions that you would say, honestly, this is why we're moving. This is what we're doing. I want you to feel safe and secure and give them that support system to say, this is what's going to happen when we move so that you feel safe and secure. Kids like routines. It's probably one of my big messages today. And people like routines, right? Like I have a calendar. I like to know what I'm going to do every day. I like to know that at some point during the day, I'm going to start with my coffee and then read my emails. Like we like routines. Kids do too. That's why actually kids tend to do pretty well in school because they go to math, then they go to language arts, then they go to music. It's thing after thing after thing. It's that upsetness and routine that can cause that problem. So again, if grandpa isn't going to a baseball game, that's an upset in the routine that you can see that behavioral disturbance if you haven't started with that honest, developmentally appropriate communication.
And I can see as a parent, a grandparent, so I'm both dealing with, perhaps I'm the person who's ill and having to deal with that life transition, or I'm the spouse, the primary caregiver, um, and I'm also worried about the child. I mean, I see where
Yeah.
the life transition is impacting the caregiver, the parent, the, person maybe on, I want to say both ends. And that would seem to be a time of, how do I take care of myself when I am busy trying to care for that person who's ill, getting to appointments, picking up
Right.
things that need to be done, but I'm also trying to prepare the child in our life for the occurrence.
Yeah, and I would say a lot of times as adults, what we struggle with is we think it's kind of weak to show our emotions. And of course, there's a balance, right? Like if we're constantly crying in front of a child, they're going to think something awful is always happening. But there are those moments where you want them to see it's okay to be sad about this life transition. It's okay to have a duality of emotions. I'm really happy that I'm getting a new house, and I'm really sad that I'm leaving this neighborhood. Those both things can be true, and we want to be able to show kids that. Because the number one thing we want to create for kids is safe environments where they can ask questions like, hey, it's safe for me to go to mom, dad, grandma, whoever, and say, I'm feeling stressed, or I'm confused, or what's going to happen to grandpa? Why can't he come to my games? Why doesn't he remember who I am? We want to create that. Because if every time a child is asking that, we say, none of your business, or it doesn't matter, or even worse, I'm in charge and that's why, which is true, right? Like as adults, sometimes it feels frustrating when kids question us. If they don't understand and it's not comfortable for them to say, I'm confused, they won't express their feelings and they won't have that basic safe environment.
Is it appropriate, or when is it appropriate, like to let someone at the school know that something's going on so that if there are behaviors or there's something going on during the school day, that there can be communication or understanding?
Yeah, I think it's always appropriate to let someone at the school know that there's a change going on because often kids are their own voice at school, right? So probably your kid's teacher knows more about your life than you realize, from working in the school system. So yeah, it's always good to say like, hey, this person who normally cared for my child, grandma, has had a significant decrease in her ability to do that. And so she's no longer picking my daughter up at school. I think it may cause a stressor. Let me know if you see something. Because the worst thing that's going to happen is the teacher is going to say, yeah, I see something, and you guys are going to have to come up with a plan for it. Because I think that's what we worry about as parents is, and as caregivers and guardians is what am I going to do when that behavior happens?
Mhm.
And sometimes that's when you need to get a professional's help or you need to get your person that you talk to about what's going on, or even just say, depending on age and developmental, hey, I noticed that something has changed at school. Can you tell me more about that?
Right. So being able to have open conversation, but then lean into the resources that might be available, school social worker or counselor,
Right.
or even counseling through Authoricare. And we're going to be talking about that for adults and children. And so thinking about on the adult side that, I think sometimes society, as you said, um, downplays like, well, that's what happens, so just deal with it. And just deal with it really is not a great plan because some of us are very capable, but that doesn't mean we're not suffering, meaning we're
Right.
not sleeping or having, other outward signs of struggle because of a transition, even if we outwardly appear to the world to be functioning.
Yeah, and I think one of the big misconceptions or issues that happens when we're in these life transitions is we do two things. The first is we think of someone else who's having a harder time than us, and we're like, wow, that person out on the street holding a sign doesn't even have a house, and here I am stressed about moving. What's up with me? The same thing happens when we're in maybe discontent with our job or we're overworked or stressed. I'm lucky I have a job. That doesn't mean the stress doesn't exist. That doesn't mean just because your mom's still alive, but you're dealing with major caregiving stressors, that doesn't mean the stress is gone just because maybe your best friend has a harder go. So I think we do that a lot where we say, oh, well, my thing isn't as bad as this person's thing, so I just need to get over it. That doesn't take the stress away. In fact, that just pushes it aside to pop back up whenever it wants to.
Well,
And I
and
think
and I
that,
think that that is one of the things that I think about the accumulation. If we don't have a standing practice of anyway, even checking in with ourselves or checking
right,
in with someone and thinking about those resources of, waiting for the pot to blow isn't the best, way
right,
of caring. Although I think many of us sort of just let it build and build and build. So talk some about when we recognize that there, day to day, there are things going on that are creating stress and we see these changes and we keep saying, but it's okay, but it's okay. What can we sort of work into our observing of ourselves, keeping an eye out for, and then being attentive to?
yeah, I think I use the word spillage a lot with people, and I think about it myself. When something is spilling into something else, it's a problem, right? So I hope that you all have someone you can bounce things off of, right? And I think that's one of the best things you can have because connection, I think, is the solution to most things, right? If you have someone that when something's going on in your life that's really difficult, if you can bounce it off them and they can say like, oh yeah, that sounds good, or no, like you're out of your values there, that's dicey, that's a good thing. But spillage is when something is affecting everything. So, for example, if you have a mom and you're caregiving for her, and it's starting to affect your job, your stress about it. It's starting to affect your job, and it's starting to affect your time with your kids, and it's starting to affect your inability to even sit down and watch a TV show. It's spilling, right? Like that's how you can see I can't even sit down and watch this TV show I really loved. I can't even go to the gym and work out for half an hour without being all stressed out. That doesn't mean your mom is the problem. That means the way you're processing it and handling it is a problem because it's spilling. And so if someone can highlight that to you, or you can start seeing it, like, wow, I was at work today and all I did was feel stressed about how I'm going to have to go home and do all these things for my mom. That's a good key indicator that it's spilling. It's spilling
Right.
into all these other areas in your life and causing issues.
And I can speak for myself. I know that at times I get to a point of being frustrated in a way that I am not normally frustrated. And I know I'm not
Same.
frustrated because I knocked the glass over. I'm frustrated because I have this like buildup, and maybe knocking the glass over is what set me off. But being able to sort of think back to what else is happening in my life. And I don't think being introspective is something that we are necessarily geared to do, or maybe I'll speak for
Right.
myself, but it's like we're supposed to think forward and push through. But there's a downside to not stopping and addressing it.
Right. Yeah. And I think it affects our other relationships. So that's a big negative. I think many of us can think of a friend we have, and I'm not saying you're this friend, but I'm saying you can think of a friend you have that will not stop talking about something that's really bothering them, but then doesn't do something about it. That's frustrating. When something you see it spilling, or even someone highlights to you, like, hey, this is a problem. Like, I see that it's really affecting you. Try to hear it. Maybe they're not saying it to you because they're annoyed with you. Maybe they're worried about you, and I think that happens to us a lot. Like you said, Risa, it happens to me because we care about things as people. So, of course, they're going to spill in different spots. But if you allow something that's a major life transition to spill everywhere, it's going to really affect your mood, your stress level, all of those things.
So talk to us, I often think about, you and I mean, we have lunch together and we talk about what's going on, but we're friends.
Right.
So I'm going to talk to you as my friend, but that's different than going and talking to, you know, somebody in the counseling center for counseling. So to differentiate, I mean, I think some people feel like talking to a friend is, and it's certainly good, but there are times when talking to a behavioral health specialist, a counselor,
Right.
is going to be more helpful.
Yeah, and what I tell people a lot as a person that of course is a proponent of therapy is your friend has a perspective. Most people are not trained therapists like Risa and I. And so they don't have that ability to hold something for you and see, is this an issue for you? Is this an issue with your friend? What part are you playing in this? Any of those kind of things. And they don't have to take it personally. So if you come to your therapist and you say, I'm not sure if I want to get divorced or not, your therapist can take your opinions, your feelings, help you sort through that stuff, work on goals. A lot of times, and me as a person who's friends to a lot of people that have been divorced, and that kind of stuff, it's hard not to be opinionated with your friend, right? Because you usually know both people and you know what you think the answer is. So, what can be really hard is when we're friends, we know so much about that person's life that we start to put our own perspective on things. And that's a really great thing to have in a friend because you want someone who cares enough about you to tell you what they think. But it's not a great perspective to have in a therapist. You want them to take what you're saying, help you sort through it, and make sure it's matching your goals.
So seeking counseling, therapy, and just for definition, I mean, they are really the same thing, right? I mean, when we're talking
Yes,
about counseling, behavioral health, intervention, I mean,
right.
there are different terms that are used, but we are talking about having an opportunity to sit with someone in a safe space, virtually or in person, and you are there to hear my story. You're there for me. We're not becoming friends, but what is it that you are then providing for me?
Right. Fresh perspective to work on the goals that you've identified. So if you say to me, I want to feel less stressed and make a decision about how I'm going to caregive for my mom who has cancer and also can't leave the home, that's something we can do. And the therapist will guide you through, hey, we talked a lot in this session, but we didn't get any closer to this goal you identified at the time. What are we going to do to make progress on that? Whereas a lot of times, friends, and again, it's wonderful to have someone to have a connection with, friends are good. Friends are just listening. They're not always helping guide you towards your goal. Some good ones, but it is hard to do that as a friend because we have individual perspectives and we're not trying to push you towards meeting your goals.
Well, and I think about, the reality that no one person or no one thing can fulfill all of our needs. And so having the
Right?
friend, maybe having that individual counseling, but I also think about, like a group. So to be a member of a group where someone, a group of caregivers, there's
Right.
something beautiful about being in that space of somebody who might not have the exact same experience, but you get that, oh, you also. And somehow that doesn't make you feel as isolated or, out of step.
Right. I think that's that lived experience. I think a lot of us know what it feels like to lose somebody or have something happen major in their lives, and other people or your friends have never had something similar happen. And so it is hard, while we all, I think, try to be empathetic, it is hard to try and keep people understanding what happened to you when they don't have that lived experience. So a lot of times we as people seek connections with those that have it. And so that's something I think we can do for each other too. Like when you know someone's going through a life transition that you've been through, it's a lovely thing to say, like, hey, not that that happened to me too. I know exactly what to do. But hey, I can understand how hard that is. I'm here.
Right. And for children, thinking about, I mean, we know developmentally, and we said that kids act out more behaviorally. So counseling for children isn't necessarily sitting in a room or being virtual and having a conversation. Depending on the age, it might involve play therapy or an activity
Right.
or talk a little bit about, you know, I'm going to trust my child, my grandchild to you, and what's
Yeah.
going to happen, and how are you going to determine the process for my child, and how am I going to know what's going on in that therapy session, or how
Yeah.
much do I get to know?
Yeah, yeah. And that can be, as a parent myself, I totally understand the stress of I'm going to give my kid to this person and they're going to help them, figure something out. But that goal creation does happen with the family unit. So what are we working on? Grandma died, and I think my child is struggling with coping. Okay, so all of our goals are going to be focused on making sure there's some way for that kid to remember grandma appropriately, coming up with coping skills and ways to manage the emotional feelings and also adjust to life without grandma. All of those things are going to be built into what we call a treatment plan, and then those things get worked on with the child. Of course, there is some stress that can come, just like with school, right? You give your kid to the teacher, you meet with them every quarter, and they might tell you some little basic things, but you don't know all day long all the little intricate pieces that happen. It's similar in that way, right? Like you're not in the session with the therapist, but you know that the therapist has gone to school, has training in this, and is working towards that goal that you and the therapist and the child created together. Sometimes those goals shift, right? So if maybe the kid comes back and says, I know how to remember grandma, I'm not worried about that at all, but I'm super anxious because she was the person I used to talk to all the time about my stress about school. well, now we need a new goal, which is who can we work on that with and who can we talk to about stress and how do we get that person involved in our lives? So goals can shift and change with kids, just like adults. But
Mhm.
right, that's that conversation that you would keep having with the therapist. And the thing about therapy is I think it's this nebulous kind of like, oh gosh, what happens in there? And then when you go, people are like, oh, it's just like talking about my feelings and making sure I'm making progress on my goals. And I think a lot of times people are like, oh, isn't it just talking? No, we want to make progress on the goals that you have. That's the whole reason to come to therapy. If you don't have a goal to make a change in your life or to work through something, there really isn't a reason to go to therapy, which people struggle with sometimes because they're like, well, I'm having a hard time. That's a therapy goal. If you're having a hard time, we want to work to make sure that you're having a little bit easier of a time. What's making it you have a hard time? Let's identify those problems so that we can create some solutions together. That's a good therapy goal. But if you're coping well and everything's fine and there's no spillage, sometimes people will say, oh, maybe I'm okay. Maybe you are. It's
Yeah,
okay to meet with a therapist and see what you think. But we also don't want to wait until there's a crisis. I think that's the
right,
thing we do a lot too, is we're
right.
like, oh, I was so-so, which is a great time to meet with a therapist. And now
Mhm.
all of a sudden I didn't do anything about it. And now I'm in crisis and I lost my job and all these things when maybe someone could have helped when we had the first starts of that spillage.
So a couple of things come to my mind. One is that I can see where a parent, grandparent might seek counseling for their child. You know, we tend to be very protective. We want to make sure that child is okay.
Yeah.
But if the life transition is causing angst for that child, there's a good potential that it may be for me also. And I often think about, you know, when the child is getting counseling. I know back when I was a bereavement counselor, I would see sometimes an adult and then the child would be seen at Kids Path. And
Yeah.
so taking care of ourselves as an adult, not only taking care of the counseling needs of a child, and how they can sometimes be really hand in glove.
Yes, yeah. And I think, we use a lot of analogies that are similar to airplanes with the oxygen mask and things like that all the time. But often what we see as therapists, or what I see as a therapist, is we care more about our children in our lives than ourselves. Of course we do. I think that's a normal adult thing, right? And especially people who are helpers, which I saw a lot of people on there, care more about others than themselves. That's like a key indicator of a helper. So what we tend to do is say like, well, let me make sure they're okay first, and then I'll get help if I need it after they're okay. But then we're not doing the things to be supportive of their changes. And so while they're getting okay, we're still sitting and stuck. And so we're not being actually supportive to the major goals and changes that this kid is making. And that can be really hard. Something that we see a lot is when some major caregiving thing happens, it identifies some family dynamics that have been there all along and are not necessarily a problem, but they're interesting, right? Like maybe mom gets sick and dad realizes, I don't know what the rules in this house were, which sounds a little crazy, but happens, right? And I think it happens with moms and dads too. When I was at work, how did they get home and do their homework? I don't actually know. And instead of feeling guilty about those things, what we can do is take it in, get some therapy, figure out what needs to happen between you and the kid, and create a new set of what life looks like through this transition. Because if grandma's sick and we always went to grandma's house and grandma helped with homework, and now this is a major routine life switch for a kid, which we said earlier causes stress, right? We as adults are going to have a lot of stress when we have to switch our major life routine around too.
Right. And so if we think about self-care, I mean, there's certainly a time to seek therapy, and I want to talk more about that. But on the everyday kind of self-care, not that prevents us from needing counseling, but there are things that I might be able to do to deal with that life transition in a really healthy way within my
Yeah.
own self, using coping skills and some techniques that could be beneficial for me, and then maybe seek counseling or maybe do both at the same time. What are some of the things that we can do for ourselves?
Yeah, I think there's two big things. Most people know what I call your relaxation technique is, you know, just from time, people know, am I an extrovert? Am I an introvert? Do I like to go on a walk when I'm stressed? Do I like to read a book? Do I like to escape and watch TV? Knowing what your self-care activity is really important. And something I said earlier, but would want to reiterate is if you're doing your self-care activity and you're still stressed, that's a big, like, oop, maybe something's going on. But if that can relax you and you can set a time to do that, that can be really helpful. And so that's the first thing I would say. And then the other one is having shared responsibilities and having blunt but honest and kind conversations with others. Maybe it's talking to your siblings and saying, hey, I have been taking care of mom all week, and I really need to be able to go get my own groceries and go have dinner with my husband and do these other things. Who can watch her on Friday night from 5 to 10?
Mhm.
Just very honest and open conversations about what you need. Which, when you're a caregiver or some other life transition is going on, a lot of times we pile these things and we just do them, and then it becomes 10:30 at night, and we're like, well, let me just do my self-care thing and watch TV and try to calm down. But that doesn't actually fix the ongoing issue.
Right. And I think this notion of asking for help is a very hard one.
Yeah.
It makes us feel weak when actually asking for help is, I've always thought, a sign of strength that I am able to say, can you help me with? I need help with.
Right.
And then for the friend or the person close to be able to make a concrete offer of, I can't be your counselor, but I
Right.
can drive you to the session if that would
Right.
help you get in the door or something of
Right.
that sort.
Yeah, because people are helpers. I think that's something we forget as people when we like to help. When something happens to someone in our lives, most of us try to activate, right? Like we're doing something, we're bringing something for them to eat, we're asking if they're okay. One of my staff members just had a baby, and like I've been checking in on her every day, being like, how's it going? What are you doing? I care. Like, I want to know if I could help her. If she was like, I need you to come watch the baby for an hour tonight, I'd drive over there. Like, that's what people do. They want to help. But we, as people experiencing things, have to be willing to say, I would want to help. I bet they do too. It's very vulnerable. I agree, Risa. But yeah, you have to be able to say, I need you, and this is the exact thing I need. Because as people, and I think we can all remember when someone died in someone else's life, it's not that you don't want to help, it's that how do I help? What do they need? I don't know what to say. How should I say it? That can be very hard.
Right. And oftentimes showing up and making a specific offer of something that you are able to do.
Right.
Because it can be hard with the anything you need, let me know. Because I don't know how to name what I need, perhaps.
Right.
But I'm also thinking about how hard it could be to initiate counseling. So
Yeah.
the literal steps of, yeah, I know that I really would benefit from talking to someone. I am concerned about, how do I find somebody? How do I pay for it? How do I even
Yeah.
motivate myself to do it, to get into action?
Yeah. And I think sometimes it feels like a big step to say, I need help and I need professionals' help. But if you went to the primary care doctor and they said, I think something might be wrong with your heart, you would go to the cardiologist. So if someone is saying to you, and not just your primary care doctor, but someone in your life, or even you, if you're like, ooh, something's a little off, It is just as easy to get into us for therapy as it is to get into a doctor's office, which some people may be like, "Oop, that's hard."
Mhm.
Maybe it's easier, but all you have to do is call, and I think we'll put them up, but an email, but the griefsupport.org, edithorcare.org, and then the phone number that we'll put up too. Like, it is just as easy to get in, to get scheduled. And the worst thing you can do, I say this to people a lot too, if you go to the cardiologist and they look at your heart and they're like, actually, your heart's just a little different, but you're doing okay, and here's some little tips to make it a little better. Cool. That's a great thing to have happen to you. If you go to one session and you realize, okay, I think I am doing well on my goals. I am coping okay for what's happening to me. And now I have a little bit of a plan. Maybe I only need to be seen once. Maybe I only need to be seen twice. That's not a bad thing. That's not
I
a bad
think
thing.
the, stigma around
Yeah.
counseling or around, it is true. If we broke our arm, we wouldn't be embarrassed to go and have our arm attended to.
Right.
But if our heart is broken, we tend to feel like that's not something we have a right, or, there's that
Right.
stigma. And I think it is, if we can normalize that it is part of living a healthy life and a way to be able to deal with what is in front of us, whether it's a physical illness, an emotional, we're
Right.
complicated beings and things overlap. Our physical health can impact our emotional health and those around us.
Yeah, absolutely. I was telling somebody the other day, I worked in primary care for a long time, and when someone starts to choke, their immediate thing people tend to do is walk away from everybody because they don't want the embarrassment of choking, right? Like, and I've
Mhm.
done it too. Like, you cough on something or you choke on a little piece of food, not choke per se, but like, you're like, oh, people like to walk away because it's embarrassing. That's what we do with behavioral health stuff too, right? We're like, oh, let's just walk away. There's some shame. Let's hide it. But actually, if you walk away and you're actually choking, you may be now in a room by yourself. So it's the same thing. You don't want to be choking and hiding it from everyone, because that is not the way to deal with something. You're going to choke. Like, if something's going on, tell someone you need a little bit of help. It seems to me that most people have been through a lot of different life transitions that we've talked about today. I've been through most of them, and I think most of us have. It's pretty easy to understand on my side as a helper. This makes sense for you to be stressed. I would be stressed if this were happening to me.
So let's talk about some things, thinking back to children, maybe older, like
Yeah.
preteen, teens, and the behaviors, perhaps we're observing things like wearing long sleeves in the summer,
Mhm.
a lot of change in weight,
Mhm.
change in grades. What are the things that we ought to be really having our antenna, not only checking in with the school, but the things that would prompt us to seek counseling? And yes, we have counseling here at AtharaCare through Kids Path for Children, but what
Yep.
are other resources that we can use?
Yeah, I think some big resources in particular, schools usually have a counselor on site, so that's a great person to get involved in the kid's life and see what's going on. The other thing that happens to us as adults, unless we see kids by ourselves entirely, then we usually do have a good, developmental spectrum, is we think something is normal teenage behavior and actually something's going on. So a lot of times what we can do, like you said, is therapists, school, asking other people in the kid's life that are other either co-parents or guardians or caregivers, like, hey, have you noticed?
Right, or
Kind of
faith
keeping some,
communities, or
yes. Yeah, keeping some little visual tracks on exactly like you said. If this kid never wore long sleeves before, now all of a sudden we're wearing long sleeves every day in the summer, something has changed. Could it be that that's the cool new look? Sure. But usually you're going to see that on everybody else too, right? So that's kind of the question you want to ask yourself is, what's the worst thing that you could do if you asked a question? So I think as adults, we're like, oh, I don't know what I'm going to do if I ask my kid if they're feeling depressed and they say yes, you're going to listen. Like that's the best thing you can do is say, "Hey, I have noticed XYZ, that you are not eating as much as you used to. Is something going on? I have noticed that you are consistently telling me your stomach hurts. That's new. Is something going on? Or how can I help?" And that allows kids to feel that, especially teens, to feel that sense of empowerment that they really need. Because if something is going on, you've now said, "I'm here. I'd like to help you if you'd let me." And what is it? Because sometimes kids surprise you. They surprise me too sometimes, right? Sometimes it's not what you think it is. Yeah, maybe grandma got sick and they can't go there anymore, but actually what they're upset about is grandma fed them something different for dinner every night and it was good, and what you make isn't as good, right? It could
Right.
be something very silly to us. And we're like, oh, this is easy to fix, but we've been dreading it for weeks. And I think that's what we like to do as people is overthink, over process when we could just have that human connection and ask.
Right. And then for adults, if we're seeing changes in ourselves or someone we care about, I often said somebody can't get counseling by proxy, meaning I
Yeah.
can't call and say, Caitlin needs counseling, set her up for an appointment. So I need to call, set up counseling through whether it's an EAP at work, it's through AuthoriCare, but a friend could or family member could help guide somebody to that.
Yeah, I often find that we as friends and helpers see things that other people don't see, right? Like the spillage, you might see, oh, wow, this major life transition is coming out in all these different places. It's not great. But it's hard sometimes when you're in it to see it. So say it kindly, hey, I want to help you. I've noticed that caregiving for your mom seems like a major stressor. It would be a major stressor for me. Make it personal. Like that would stress me. I'm wondering if this would help you. I'm wondering if going to therapy would help you. I've gone before and it really helped me. That kind of takes the pieces out of it to say, oh, Caitlin is just thinks something's wrong with me. No, Caitlin thinks something's occurring with you and has investment in helping you fix it.
And what about the fear of getting a diagnosis or
Yeah.
having, my personal life written out and privacy? And again, some of that is that stigma because we share,
Sure,
hopefully,
yeah.
our medical health history. But there's an increased sensitivity, particularly, I think, if there's something around substance or maybe thoughts of suicide, or there are certain things that we become very concerned about being labeled or being stigmatized.
Yes. And I would say, while I do understand that, I think the more stigmatizing thing, especially if we're thinking of some of the bigger times when we'd worry about that, is not getting help. So if you know about something that's going on with you and you're choosing not to get help, that's usually seen as worse. But the stigmatizing part of it of, oh, I have depression. While I understand that's stressful and hard, you have it whether you have that label or not, right? Like that occurs and that's existing inside you, and not taking care of it because you're worried about the label is hard. Now, behavioral health records have a special security. So, like, they have to be released by you to someone else. So, if you were to say, hey, I don't want these records released to this person, there would have to be major steps to get those released, which is quite difficult to do. The other thing is people have to know where you go, right? And the other thing I would say is if you're going to your primary care doctor and telling them any of these symptoms or signs, you're getting that diagnosis from them. So while it's hard, if you go to the primary care doctor and you say, my heart hurts every day, my heart rate's been really high, when I try to run, it's getting up incredibly high, you probably got some kind of cardiac diagnosis just to get referred to go to the cardiologist. So if you go to your primary care doctor and you say, I'm caregiving for my mom, it's causing a lot of stress, not to dissuade you from saying that to the doctor because it's honest and you should do it. you are probably going to get the same thing you get from that as you would get from a therapist. So I think people sometimes think that they don't get behavioral health diagnoses in primary care when actually it's a lot faster.
Well, I can imagine one is thinking about insurance reimbursement. There for some people is a need for prior authorization, and that's a
Yes,
process that can feel overwhelming in and of itself. And I know at AthoraCare, we don't want cost to
right,
be
to
a
be a barrier.
barrier. For those that have had somebody die under our hospice program, we're providing that bereavement service immediately available for that first year. We know
Yeah.
for the entire community, services are available. We make use of insurance, but we also make account for financial difficulty and
Yeah.
have a process, correct?
Yes. Yeah, we have a financial difficulties program. So it can be donated care, it can be sliding scale, income based. The insurance companies that contract with us, which are most insurance companies, Medicaid, Medicare, all those majors, they work through that with you. So they would have the same copay as other places you have copays for. But that is something that if you called, we could answer a lot of those questions. Because I know that cost can be a barrier and a stressor. And that is something that we can do is look at that and see what needs to happen. Because I agree, Risa, we don't want cost to be a barrier to getting the care that you need.
Right. I also think about, we know many people take medications, and for some people, medication can be amazingly effective, but there's also a space where counseling along with medication or counseling without medication. So it's not one or the other necessarily. There can be a place for both in people's lives.
Oh, yeah.
And the talk therapy can be so effective for people.
Yes. And I think what can happen is a chemical imbalance in your brain, which the medications help with. And being able to process with someone that can help you identify what do you want to change, what do you want to keep, what do you want to make better, and how do we make those goals is a really big deal. Because a lot of times, what my goal might be in a situation might be really different than yours, Risa. And so, your friends, again, as lovely and wonderful as they may not understand that your goals might not match theirs, and they are not attuned to asking those questions. So while I want you to get that connection, it's perfect to do so. It is really good to be able to see someone who can say, okay, it sounds like you're struggling here. What do we want to work on? And can help you identify, yes, I'm getting divorced, but actually I'm quite happy about that. I need to process how to move on with my life and start dating again, which might be a totally different answer from the other person that was in the relationship, right? They might be like, oh, well, actually, I'm getting divorced. I'm really mad at my ex. I'm blaming them for it. And I don't think I'm ever going to be happy again. Those are two different goals.
Right. And the notion, I think, of life transitions, when we think of counseling, sometimes people think of the major depression or, significant mental health diagnoses, of which many people have, certainly, but there's also a place for counseling for coping with life. The coping with the sadness that comes from the impending death of someone, the sadness that comes that it's Mother's Day on Sunday and this is my
Yes.
first,
Yeah.
Mother's Day without a mother, or it's my 30th Mother's Day without, I think sometimes people might think that counseling is only if I have, something,
Big.
not diagnose, yeah, something big, but counseling can be empowering and strengthening for us during those hard times and help guide
Yeah.
us.
Yeah, it can be preventative, I think, is kind of what we're saying. Like helping people build resilience for how to manage those symptoms before they get worse is a big part of counseling. So if you know sometimes I have panic attacks or have had panic attacks, we have to work on a plan for when you're in those panic moments. Because if you don't know what to do when you're in a panic moment, how are you going to cope with it? And then we work on the triggers that got you there too, right? So there's two pieces to that. And similarly with Mother's Day, if that is always a stressor for you, year 1, year 5, year 30, how do we deal with that day? Maybe pieces of reclaiming it back, having some kind of tradition, doing something differently, getting someone that you have a connection with in your life to say, like, hey, on Mother's Day, we both lost our moms. Let's do this thing together. There's a lot of pieces of that that you can do in therapy. There's some you can do for yourself, like that example, but having those preventative plans of, I know Mother's Day is bad for me. What am I going to do? We say the same thing. I mean, Mother's Day is definitely coming up in a thing about holidays. You know, we say the same thing about lots of stuff because it can be surprising for people's birthdays. It can be surprising for us what comes around the corner, right?
So as we come to the end of our time, I want to think certainly being proactive. We're talking about being proactive, looking for signals, looking for signs. But if we are in an absolute crisis ourselves or are in the presence of somebody who is in a crisis, meaning that they may be thinking of harming themselves, talking about that. I want to just have you tell us about the 988 hotline. Like, what can we do in an actual crisis?
Yeah. So first of all, if someone has told you that they're thinking of harming themselves or they're feeling super depressed and they don't want to be around any of those kind of words, like I want to die, those are all things. It is somewhat of an honor that they trusted you enough to give you that information. I know it feels like a burden or a stressor for us, but it is wonderful that they use their voice to say that. So I want you to take that moment and say to yourself, wow, this person trusted me enough to come to me in one of their darkest moments. There are a couple things I would suggest. The first is the 988 number is a 24-hour hotline, much like 911, but for behavioral health crises. They can give you the best advice about what to say, what to do, and you can text that number, which is super cool, especially
And
for
I can
teens.
call it myself if I'm in
Yep.
distress. So I don't
Yes.
have to
Yep.
tell anybody.
That's right. Yeah. So
Okay.
if you're at that moment and you're like, I don't know what to do, the best response I can say is, thank you for telling me about that. I'm concerned about you. How can I help? I would listen for a second and I would call the 988 number so you can get the best answers and advice. They can talk to that person. They can coach you through talking with that person and them. It's the best situation. Because if someone says they feel like or they want to die, that happens, right? I think most people can imagine or have felt what it feels like to want to die. It doesn't mean they're going to die, but it's a very serious thing to say that we need to take seriously and act on it. So, yes, and I know that it's a scary thing. And if it's been said to you by someone else or you've ever thought it, you know how scary those words feel and how heavy they are, especially as a health professional where we're trying to save and help everyone, right? But yes, calling that 988 number and getting help from somebody who's trained, specializes in that is a great idea. Texting is great too.
Okay. And I think that this has been wonderful. We want to be planful, but we want to be prepared. So thank you. Thank you for the information, for what you do. Thank you to everyone who's joined us today. We will be sending out an email tomorrow that will have access not only to the recording, but a number of resources that are available, including the counseling services for adults and children at AtharaCare Collective, but other resources as well. So keep an eye out for that email. And Caitlin, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I also want to bring attention to our webinar that we are going to be having next month. It is going to be a wonderful conversation. We have a speech pathologist, and Sina is going to be joining us and talking about dementia-friendly communication and ways that we can connect with those who may have cognitive issues from dementia, different types of dementia, and being able to include them in our lives and feel confident as possible that we are not only communicating well, but we're being compassionate at the same time. So that registration is open for the webinar on June 4th. So please join us if you are able. It will be a wonderful conversation. And when I reflect back on our conversation, certainly dementia is something that brings a number of life transitions, and to reach out to resources that are available in our life through resources we'll be sharing, faith communities, our employment, our physicians, anybody in our circle of friends. And there's a quote that I wanted to share in ending that says, I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept. And Angela Davis said that, and to seek that assistance for ourselves, because we all deserve to be at a place of peace during difficult times. So thank you. I hope everyone has a good rest of the day, and thank you for joining.